The Talk Station presents Faith Matters, a look at contemporary stories and issues from a faith perspective. While this is a pre-recorded show, we are interested in your ideas, comments, and questions, and we urge you to email them to faithmatters@thetalkstation.com.
Give me faith, trust what you say, that you're good and your love is great. I'm broken inside, I give you my life.
And now on the Talk Station, Faith Matters.
And welcome to the program. Good to have you back with us here on Faith Matters on the Talk Station. I'm Ben Ball, pastor of Broad Creek United Methodist Church, along with Reverend Robert Corrigan, associate pastor at Chapel by the Sea, and Dr. Bob Wilson, who is the author of A Nullifying God, who joins us here today. And it's a good day, gentlemen. Good to have you all here today.
Good to be here.
Hey, it's great to be here, Ben.
We're missing Carl today, but that's we'll have to pick him up the next time.
Yes, indeed.
All right. So Dr. Bob gets to move up a seat and be promoted here.
This is, I can't even begin
Rarefied
to tell you
air.
what
Yeah.
an incredible privilege this is. I understand that this is just a temporary
It's a temporary
thing,
thing,
but I will
Well, I don't
recall
know.
it and try to be worthy of
Yeah.
it being up
Yeah,
there.
Carl may get demoted. We have to vote on that one at some point. All right, well, let's move along here today as we look at the various topics of faith in the news here today. This one is probably not one that was on a lot of people's radar, but it points to some very interesting things going on in this country and around the world. It's the article comes from NHPR, New Hampshire Public Radio, and the article is entitled "Judge Again Halts Deportation of Indonesians Living in New Hampshire." A federal judge in Boston is blocking the government from deporting dozens of Christian Indonesians living in New Hampshire while they're given a chance to fight against their removal. U.S. District Judge Patty Saris ruled Thursday that the Indonesians who fear persecution have returned home should be given time to reopen their cases. Saris, they said they provided unrebutted evidence showing that they would risk persecution or torture if deported. The government had urged the judge not to block their removal. The Indonesians had been allowed to stay as long as they regularly reported to immigration officials, but in recent months they were told they should buy plane tickets and prepare to leave the country. Now, Robert, this is some part of the what the Trump administration has done to try and clean up a lot of immigration laws and exceptions that are out there. We talked earlier about Guatemalan. This was several weeks ago. We talked about the Guatemalan exception because of an earthquake there.
Right.
And you, I think you had been down there.
Been down there, that's right.
And there was an exception there, but they ruled, the Obama administration, I think correctly, ruled that conditions have changed. And so that exception should not be continued. In this case, these folks have been here for a long time, again, but the part of the decision was that they have, or the previous decision to rescind that was, again, that we don't recognize Indonesia as a threatening country. However, they're offering evidence to the contrary.
Well, that's right, and I think that's the thing. The overextending visas has always been a problem, and we tend to think, oh, well, they're just students, and
That's probably that's the most of
most
our
are,
illegal
but there are all kinds of circumstances where people, either they don't do what they were required to do, they just don't do it, or they purposefully try to disappear, in the culture. And
in this case, they had kept renewing them.
They had kept renewing. That's exactly right. And this was in the 90s when they came over. So that's, 25, 30 years ago. So, and they've been here ever since. And now, but the problem is, as we were talking about, the conditions have changed in Indonesia. And there was a tolerance.
Right.
The Muslims and the Christians had really gotten along pretty well for generations in Indonesia. But now there's a militant aspect to the government and I don't know if you remember the political stuff when a Christian was elected as president, and I mean it was a big deal, and he was removed from office.
Right.
And this was several years ago, because during the previous administration there was no way that Indonesia was going to be declared a a hostile nation or a terrorist nation or something like that. And so now we're seeing that these people are in real danger of going back to their home country.
When their exception was first granted, I don't know what the reason was. I don't know what was the threat or that they feared then. Or it may have been something completely different. But now Indonesia is, as you mentioned, is a very different and a threatening country. A lot of terrorist groups study there, and we track not only people who when somebody's on a terrorist watch list. That's one of the places we track them when they go.
There's always been a radical element in Indonesia, a Muslim element, and they have attacked churches and they have attacked communities that were predominantly Christian. And I mean, there's always been a tension there to a degree, but generally speaking, they were able to kind of, live together in peace. And so it could have been they were one of these, a village or a church group that had their church had been attacked or something.
Do you? I'm going to throw something out from left field here. Do you think there's a possibility that because these individuals, these Indonesians, are Christian, that there's some kind of a animus against them from the government here to get them out of the country? I mean, Muslims can stay, but here we've got Christians, and they want to move them back to a country that could be a problem. Now, that's far out. I
don't know, and don't know if there are any other people of other faiths that are
I would
involved.
hate that would be the case. I'm hoping it's just a bureaucratic, checking off the box.
Right. Yeah. And it may be that whatever the original reason was doesn't exist any longer. It's similar. That's why I brought up the Guatemala case. It may be that, but they want their case to reprove that there is now a new threat.
Well, the good thing about this is that it's bipartisan. Mm-hmm. Both there's Republicans and Democrats in New Hampshire.
Republican governor.
Yeah, and senator,
Democrat senator.
Say this is a good thing. That they're giving them 90 more days to be able to challenge their having to leave. So that's good.
But the people involved, it's like having the sword of Damocles dangling over their head.
Well, exactly.
Well, that's been said about other groups too. I mean,
it's not knowing. Do you send your kids to school? How do you actually develop a life here, or what? It's a very difficult situation for the people involved.
Yeah, and from what the article said, they have integrated into the culture. They've learned English. 30 years, they've had kids. They've got probably grandchildren. Yeah. That original group now in the country who are now citizens.
But can't you see this, though, may be the exception that proves the rule here?
Well, they came in legally. Number one, it wasn't illicitly. Mm-hmm. They went through the protocol.
True.
And they came in legally. So I think that is where they may have some grounds to be able to challenge this decision. So it'll be interesting to see how this works out. But then you have to, with the DACA Dreamer thing, and all of that.
But we have to be careful, and this is where we have to be careful in the politics of this, that it doesn't get mixed up because they are different.
That's a very political. They came in illicitly.
Yes,
even though they were brought in by their parents.
Yeah,
it was still illicit. They were not. They didn't go through the proper channels.
So this is a different idea.
Completely. That's exactly right.
And so,
but you can bet there'll be some that probably trying to conflate it all.
Well, they already are. So,
right.
But again, this is an idea that there may be other exceptions. For example, there may be Muslims in this country who would be considered apostate if they moved back because they are not. Like I interviewed one who has a Jewish girlfriend. He says I can't go back to to a Muslim country.
Mm-hmm. Right.
They have to. There may be other considerations as well. And this is a whole new world of examining why people are here and what are they running from.
That's
and
exactly
brings up
right.
all the other refugee issues as well.
And there are mechanisms for this in our immigration system, but it's getting to the right people at the right time is the thing, I think. So we'll see how this goes. ICE says, I mean, this is ICE, and so they're reacting to some initiatives, and so they're doing it
Again, it's all the folks who had exceptions. They're re-examining whether or not those exceptions still exist.
Well, and just going back to your point, it could be a political thing in the sense of, oh, well, here's a group of Christian people that have acclimated, they become good
So
citizens.
here we're not being discriminatory. Right?
Exactly.
Right.
And or the other way,
Right,
too.
exactly.
That, they're getting caught up in this ruthless net of sending people back, so...
It's funny because I'm old enough to remember Ellis Island and what the refugees, immigrants that came in through there. I mean, they were screened for everything from, especially for TB, tuberculosis.
Right.
And they were turned back. There was a lot of them turned back. But those who came in, by and large, they proved to be citizens. They were going to be Americans first. That was their entire thing. They were going to, yes, they had their own communities, of course, but at the same time, this was something of value to them. It wasn't something that was owed to them. And that seems to be a lot of the immigration mess that we have today. People just come in and who cares?
Well, clearly we have to set up levels of discernment here.
Yes, I guess that's what I was driving at.
Yeah. Is that those who came in legally and have been renewing their permission to be here all along, we have to examine that and carefully, not just to give a blanket policy for all of them as well. We have more to come in here on Faith Matters on the talk station, FM 107 and AM 1240. And welcome back to Faith Matters here on the talk station, FM 107 and AM 1240. And I'm Ben Ball, along with Dr. Bob Wilson and also Reverend Robert Cornegy. And as we are talking about some other issues out here, I want to bring up a couple of things that actually involve lawsuits that were settled. Sort of that tension that we've often talked about here on the show between government and religion and where does this fall? And so there's a couple of things that happened just in the last week or so. One is from NJ.com about New Jersey. It says Bayonne settles lawsuit with Muslim group clearing the way for a mosque. The other is also out of New Jersey. It's called NorthJersey.com, and it's an article about a Mawa Eru, I think I'm saying that right, will remain standing, settlement says, and the town will pay group $10,000. So both these are about settlements of lawsuits with religious groups. It's an interesting subject that even come up. In the Bayonne case, the city has reached a $400,000 settlement with a local Muslim group that will allow the organization to build its community center in its original location on the east side of the city. By settling with the nonprofit Bayonne Muslims, who filed a federal lawsuit against the city in May, Bayonne will avoid what could have been a long and costly legal battle. As a result, the Bayonne Muslims will have a green light to convert a vacant industrial property they purchased on East 24th Street 2.5 years ago. Per the settlement, the Bayonne Muslims will be permitted to establish their community center there. The argument had been from other citizens about traffic or the town, and they're saying it's an industrial area. There's no real traffic there. It's not going to be an issue. Again, clearing the way for this, but it had to come to a lawsuit, and I think that's part of the issue. Is that where our religion and our cities and our towns get mixed up. I mean, it's not unusual for a church to be sued over parking, over a building, and somebody building a church. And I know one in this area, Methodist Church, actually had lawsuits when they built a new building because even though it fit all the codes and everything else, the neighbors weren't happy about it. So this is hard. Where do we fit all our different understandings of faith beliefs in the community? And the other case too is about a Eru, which is a demarcation that a Jewish or especially Orthodox a Jewish group will put on an area that allows Jews to use it during the Sabbath. And so this was a park. So now the neighborhood or the citizens were complaining that a lot of Jews from New York were coming in and using this because it was okay to be there on the Sabbath. So, Robert, this is an interesting world we live in, where our religious beliefs and faiths of different beliefs are settled in court.
Yeah, you look at it. I'm from an area. I'm from North Carolina, but when you read about how communities change over time, I mean, it even happened in my little hometown. That what was once a white Anglo-Saxon Protestant community changed as other people groups, if you will, ethnic groups moved in and changed the tone of the community. And so what we're having is a local government with a local planning board. This is the lowest, I guess you could say, form of government in our system. So it's city, and then there's county, and then there's state, and then there's federal. And so the federal law is, this is that whole federalism debate. How much of the state, how much control does a state or a group of citizens, a community, a city have control over their community? And when we have these federal positions coming in, federal laws coming in and overriding local decision making, and they bring in the big guns, you're fighting federal systems now. It becomes a real problem. So, yeah, I'm sympathetic to people who don't want to see their community change, but I don't know that you can stop it legally.
Yeah.
That's just the way it's always been. And there's, it used to be you had to attack and wipe them out, and then it was yours. And so
we don't
do it that way anymore.
No.
We do it by, population growth and relocation and that kind of thing. And it starts changing. And one group will come in and outnumber the other group and take up positions in the local government. And suddenly it's a different kind of thing going. So
and I think it's going to be that way. I mean,
that's the way it's going to be.
Yeah, it's just one of the things that strikes me about this, though, is forget the fact that we're talking about Muslims or Jews here.
Right.
It really comes down to any group, whether building a new Methodist church or a new Catholic church or anything like that. I mean, where does the community? There's some kind of a gap there about. If Christians have a right to build a church in a parking lot, so do Muslims have a right to build a mosque.
Right.
I mean,
This is part of the great American experiment.
Right. There's no
experiment.
There's no distinction there between in what the substance of the argument is. Where I would draw the line is if you want to get a mezuzah up there saying prayers at 6 o'clock at night or 6 o'clock in the morning. I'm sorry, guys, time out.
Yeah. Well, we had that with Duke Chapel.
Yeah.
So there was some argument about that.
Duke Chapel.
Right.
Yeah.
So this is I think you hit it squarely, is that we built a country based on tolerance, yet we've seen the definition of tolerance change a lot.
Yes, we have.
So where can we reestablish our understanding of that within our boundaries of what it means to be an American and be a citizen?
Well, that's a great point. Look, I mean, we are advocates of the First Amendment to the Constitution, the Bill of Rights. That we have freedom of expression in religion, so we have the right to be able to live it out the way we do. Now, is that
free exercise of religion?
Free exercise, is that strictly Christian? Do we draw the circle around Christian, or do we include the Jews? Do we include Muslims? Do we include
Baha'i?
Do we include every other faith group? Well, according to our pluralistic culture, we do. We say that, okay, but there are restrictions and there are zoning and
just like you can't
city
yell fire in a
restrictions.
theater.
You can't violate. There are certain things that we do. I mean, we have all kinds of rules limiting that. So they're perimeters or parameters that you have to fit in.
When they're equally applied.
When they're
or-
equally applied.
right,
That's
so-
exactly right.
In this case, there was pushback from parts of the community that simply just did not want a mosque in the community.
Right.
I mean, that was pretty much it.
Right.
Even though it was in an industrial area, it was, and they also, I guess, are because they're worried. I mean, and there's some legitimacy to worry about what may go on in a madrasa or a mosque because of what we have seen in the past. So, but that's a different issue, I think, from whether or not they are allowed. Right now, they meet in a basement of a Catholic church. Mm-hmm. So there's some issue here about where we hold true to our values as Americans, and where do we try to seek. In other words, the battle doesn't need to be fought necessarily over zoning.
Right.
Our battle for hearts and minds and our beliefs and faith isn't about zoning.
Right.
No.
It's going to be about our faith, our witness.
Right.
And I think the other thing is that you need to pick and choose the battles that you fight, because would it be better to allow them to come in, or would it be better to push back and say no and get into a big brouhaha, which is going to make a real mess out of things, and have a court settle
it for you.
Something that is not good at all.
Well, it may get to that. If they were found to be adhering to a radical jihadism, and they were teaching overthrow of the government and that kind of thing, then you have grounds to be able to say, hey, wait a minute.
Yeah.
You know, you're that's a boundary you're crossing there in our pluralistic, because that's
In the Jewish case is interesting because what the argument here is about public spaces. What is allowed? What do we allow for public? When a community builds a park, is it a park for their community, or is it a park for anybody else who wants to come in to the community? So, and if a group designates this as this is our unofficial and informal meeting place, what do we do? Well, communities generally do have rights to try to say how a space is going to be used, but this is a tough one. In this case, in this community in North Jersey, they were basically just afraid of the expense of fighting it in court.
well, that's right.
Even
The
though
city.
they felt like they had a legitimate case.
Well, now my understanding is that it's not for exclusive use only,
No,
That was that's the
anyone
impression.
no, it's
can
not.
use
Anybody
it.
can use it.
but it's been sort of blessed
Right.
as a place where you can walk your dog or
Right.
push your baby carriage or
On Sunday.
whatever
On Sunday.
On Saturday.
On
Saturday,
the
sorry.
Sabbath.
yeah,
Yes,
that's
on the
right.
Sabbath.
Yeah.
Well, I remember Mewa as being the Ford plant up there. There was a Ford assembly plant up
really?
there and up in Mewa. And it was an industrialized section, and I don't know much more about it than that. But if there's a park which a Jew can come and relax on Saturday and walk around and without violating a Sabbath rule, that's fine by me. I don't really see what the pushback was. But I don't know what the Jewish interaction with the people who live up there is.
Well, it wasn't the issue that they were, the New Yorkers were coming over.
Yeah, the issue was it was outsiders coming in,
Right,
and they were
exactly.
taking up all the picnic area.
Yeah, exactly.
So, we'll have more to come in a moment here on Faith Matters on the Talk Station. I'm Ben Ball, along with Reverend Robert Cornigan and Dr. Bob Wilson. We'll have more after this. And welcome back to Faith Matters here on the Talk Station, FM 107 and AM 1240. And I'm Ben Ball, along with the Reverend Robert Cornigan and Dr. Bob Wilson. And we're talking about two articles that appeared in the Stream in the last week or so. And stream.org is something that we often come to. One is from Deacon Keith Fournier, and his article is about Tim Kaine says no to his church and conscience. And the other is an article from Donald McLaughlin. It's about College of William & Mary taps alum James Comey to teach ethical leadership. So let's take a look at both of these, because I think they have a Robert, I think if we were looking at a common thread here, it's expressed in the Comey article about the rise of ethical relativism.
That's exactly right.
Yeah, you have James Comey being, just sounds kind of funny. He's going to be teaching ethical leadership at my alma mater, and then you have Tim Kaine, who's running for re-election as a senator from Virginia, and he is talking about how his faith is so important to him as a Catholic, and that he's devout as a Catholic, yet doesn't hold true to the Catholic tenets in terms of what he professes. Except that in the break you were talking about how Kaine does express it that he is obedient, but he doesn't believe necessarily that projects on others.
Isn't that interesting? That's sort of the rationalization that we're finding with most if you put it, religious politicians, but actually it's everybody. Mm-hmm. We hold to these high ethical standards, but it's a pragmatism. It's sometimes we have these standards set up there, and so we can take whatever means it takes to get to that. And so what we're finding is for Kaine, he's saying that personally, I would never be, personally involved in an abortion. Mm-hmm. I would never be personally involved in in terms of me personally marrying someone of the same sex. I hold to my church's teachings on that. But anyone else, I can't dictate to them what is their ethical position. I can't project my ethics onto those that think differently than me. And that's, and you hear this constantly from Pelosi and from all those that are in those that claim to have a very deep spiritual relationship with God through their church, yet they don't defend.
They don't see an ethical conundrum of being able to take that position that they say they support. Personally, they support the tenets of the church. Yet, in his case, he voted against the Pain-Capable Unborn Child Protection Act.
Exactly.
Just a week or so ago.
Yeah.
Where this law would have it would have saved the lives of unborn children who can feel pain while they're being aborted. So,
it's funny. I get these funny thoughts just all of a sudden right off the top. I wish I had my Bible with me, because there's a quote there by Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. on just and unjust laws and morals. And I think of individuals like Dr. King, and I think, what would he have to say to these people that are morally ambiguous in a sense? He fought for a wonderful thing, and was he not putting his views on other people? I mean, he was there. He was straight up front, and everything I have read in this man, I would love to meet him and shake his hand and say, "Sir, we need you today." Yeah. And I think that applies to a situation where we have a Tim Kaine, using him as an example, because King would have none of this.
Right. Don't we judge the efficacy of our ideals by the way we behave? That's the only way we can judge that, isn't it? I mean, you can say all kinds of things.
Fruit of the Spirit.
But it's the way you actually live your life that ideas have consequences, and the consequence of these standards, these sacraments, if you will, have to have effect on the way you live your life and the way you communicate what is truth and what isn't truth. And so, and this is basically that relativism idea, postmodern thought, that there really are no absolute truths. And therefore, whatever, we've been having a discussion about autonomy versus interdependence and how that works. And the biblical worldview is one of interdependence. That we are not isolated, autonomous beings, that we were created. And, you were talking about your church, the Methodist Church, and its historical focus on
Connection.
togetherness, connection,
Connectionalism, yeah.
right, and how we're starting to see that break down, and how one of the Supreme Court justices talks about this. It's not a right to privacy that they found and they made up in the Constitution, Bill of Rights. It's a right to be autonomous from everyone else and determine what is your truth.
Self-determination.
Yeah.
You're talking autonomous, but it's interesting, going back to Tim Kaine and Catholicism. One of the prayers of the Mass, which I love, is the priest says, "From age to age you gather a people to yourself, so that from east to west a perfect offering may be made to the glory of your name." Wow. Now that's bringing everybody in. I mean, there's no autonomous person within that.
Yeah.
And I can't see
All right.
Jesus having that either.
Well, let's also add in here that James Comey, the former FBI director, has been hired by my alum, my alma mater too. Apparently, he was an alum there as well too. I don't know what class he was in, but he, from College of William and Mary, has announced that former FBI director will teach a course on ethical leadership. Now, again, this is the guy who illegally leaked a memo about his private talks with President Trump. And that he's going to teach a course on ethics. This, as the article states here, Donald McLaughlin writes, in 1991, Charles Colson spoke at Harvard University School of Business. He'd gone to jail for his service to President Nixon. Now he explained, quote, why Harvard can't teach ethics. As a society, we gave up our common belief in a transcendent value system. This gave rise to relativism in the me generation. Without a fixed common value system, each person could decide for themselves what is right and good. Colson talked about his own case. He saw himself as morally strong and good character and value. To get what he thought was good, he broke the law. In my own self-righteousness, he said, I was never more dangerous.
That's Colson.
Yeah.
That's
an
exactly
amazing
right.
Quote.
That's
In
a
my
brilliant
own
quote.
self-righteousness, I was never more dangerous. Oh my goodness.
Yeah, that's right. Because we can justify anything, just as we were talking earlier. We can rationalize anything. And so, Comey has had, he would claim the higher ground, moral ground, ethical ground. But it's that thing that he could use means that were not of that standard, of that worldview, to accomplish that end. And the end, unfortunately, is because of his concept is distorted because of the fall, because of the sin nature. All of it, we don't have pure motives. We don't have these things. That's something that we need help with, the help of the Holy Spirit. And so that's why, as I'm working through this with my teenage grandsons right now on where are you finding your values and your morals, your ethics? Are you finding them inside of your thinking, or are you finding them on an external standard that exists from God? And you have to go back to that. You just can't ignore it. And so that's what we're finding is these guys are setting up their own standard. Basically, and it's a pale reflection of the true standard.
A distorted reflection.
Yeah.
And one of the things that crossed my mind as you were talking there is what Jesus said, both in the Gospel of Matthew and the Gospel of Mark. For out of the heart proceeds, and then he lists this.
Right.
And so that is intrinsic to us.
That's exactly right.
And that is something we in and of ourselves cannot overcome. And if we rely on our own self, on our own judgment to set up moral standards, they are going to be corrupted in one way or another by the fact that we don't have a clean heart.
Yeah, that's right.
We set up our own standards, and we basically have no standards.
Right.
Because we're not in agreement with somebody else's. So who is right and who is wrong?
Yeah, right.
Whoever wins the day.
That old saying, it's said different ways, but don't be so open-minded that your brains fall out. That's really what happens. We try, and that's what, in this sort of liberalism, the new definition of liberalism, not the old definition of liberalism, but the new one is that there's no boundaries to whatever your your path you choose. There should be no obstacles. And so that if anyone puts an obstacle in the way, they're the problem, not you. And and that is so contrary to the way life really works.
And it's contrary to really Paul's understanding of what is a stumbling block.
Right.
You see, that's the liberal understanding of a stumbling block is anything that is of moral value.
Right.
Paul's understanding of a stumbling block was anything of an amoral or immoral value.
Exactly.
So very different ideas.
Yeah.
You know, it's funny, in talking about this, I just thought back to an old 60s expression, if it feels good, do it.
Yeah.
There's no limits. There's nothing wrong. And I think you would agree today that last year when we went to the pregnancy conference, one of the things that the speaker brought up is the rate of STDs today is skyrocketing. There's consequences
to these thinking.
Yeah, exactly.
Again, that's Dr. Bob Wilson, who is the biologist, author of Nullifying God, also Reverend Robert Cornegy with us too here on Faith Matters, and we'll be back with more in just a moment. And welcome back to Faith Matters here on the Talk Station, FM 107 and AM 1240. Thanks for joining us here today. I'm Ben Ball, pastor of Broad Creek United Methodist Church, Reverend Robert Cornegy, associate pastor, Chapel by the Sea in Emerald Isle, and Dr. Robert Wilson, who is the author of Nullifying God, and Dr. Bob is with us as well as we discuss sometimes what we call our sign of the apocalypse. And this is the final story comes from the Wichita Eagle. And because it involves Kansas, instead of fasting, group is marking Brownback's last day with virtual pizza party. It's written by Denise Neal in the Wichita Eagle. It says, you could fast and pray to mark Governor Sam Brownback's last day in office as he requested on Monday, or you could go in another direction. A Facebook event page making the rounds on Tuesday mockingly invites people to instead bid farewell to Brownback, whose last full day in office is today, with a virtual statewide Buy Brownback pizza and beer party. Everyone takes pictures of them, posts them on the event page, and we'll have a good old time. Brownback is resigning to become U.S. Ambassador at Large for International Freedom, which is effective at 3 o'clock on Wednesday. His office designated today, which is the last full day, as a day of prayer and fasting. This, we've talked about prayer and fasting before, how it used to be kind of a standard for public officials to call for a day of prayer and fasting over big events. Now, I don't know that this would qualify as that kind of event, but still, is the idea is that collectively as a people, we need to come to God and we need to offer ourselves as a living, holy and living sacrifice. To understand a little bit more about God's will for us, and He understands this. Governor Brownback understands this, and he was calling for a day of prayer and fasting. Well, I'm sure the writer of this article is probably too young to understand that as well. But the National Day of Prayer, Robert, as you've been very much a part of, originated with a day of prayer and fasting.
That's exactly right. Yeah.
Is that this used to be a common sentiment that this is how we sought our help. We knew from whence our help came.
Yeah, these big historic changes, and this is pretty huge, the position he's going into. I mean, it's really, they left out a word. It's international religious freedom.
Freedom, yeah.
And that is really a remarkable ambassadorial position to be representing to the world
religious freedom.
This value that we hold sacred of religious freedom, and one of the founding stones of our faith, and that it's not from, there's a higher authority than government that is the source of this value. It didn't come from government; it came from God, God-given rights. And so for them to mock it, yeah, it really is. They called it the statewide Buy BYE Brownback pizza and beer party. So they're saying, oh yeah, good, and get rid of him, but it just shows just how snarky our culture has become. All this is happening on social media, so everybody tries to outsnark everybody else. And if you don't know what snark means, what's a good definition of snark, Ben?
But it's more than making fun of. I mean, it's almost a vicious thing, a put down.
A satirical compliment sometimes.
Right? Yeah, but a backhanded kind of thing. Yeah.
The thing is that it goes back to the fact that my perception of what we're talking about here is that there is no standard, there is no God, there is no way to get above and beyond it. Goodbye, good riddance, get out of here. We don't want you because we don't want your ideas infecting us. And so we're rejecting you, and actually we're going to make fun of you on the way out. It's really a tragic thing, because going back to early days when I was a Catholic, prayer and fasting, if you were asked to do that, it was a solemn obligation. People would be in church, and there would be water there, definitely. And what you would do is to rotate shifts throughout the day, a 2-hour or 3-hour shift, and you would do that for 24 hours. Somebody would be in church, and they would be praying during that time. Some people did the rosary, some people did the Our Father, some people just one-to-one with God. But that was a very solemn thing.
Yeah. If you don't get prayer, you won't get fasting.
No,
the two of those together, because one, you can, there are plenty of health people, health reasons that you may want to fast. I was just heard an interview yesterday about how to extend your life through fasting.
Oh yeah, there's all kinds of fasting diets.
Well, who wants to live longer if you can't eat?
And there's reasons for medical reasons.
Yeah,
for
exactly.
Non-fasting as
That's
well.
exactly right.
But
the
idea,
from a spiritual discipline is what he's talking about. This is a spiritual discipline.
And it doesn't have to be fasting from food.
No, that's right.
It can be fasting from anything that distracts your attention from God.
We're getting ready to go into Lent, right?
Right.
You're right.
Fasting is a big part of Lent. And it doesn't necessarily have to be food. It can be whatever.
Twitter.
Twitter, yeah, that's right.
I know somebody needs that. Yeah. The idea again though is that here is, and it used to be, we had at the beginning of World War One, it was, who was president? Woodrow Wilson called for a day of prayer and fasting. We had, and it goes back to Washington, and it goes back to other of our leaders from then on. It's about from World War One on, it was stopped doing that. But it used to be that our national leaders called for a day of prayer and fasting when anything happened. That even if it wasn't, quote, our fault, we would we would pray for repentance.
Doesn't that go along with our motto? That I know it doesn't go back till then to the Washingtons and whatnot, but in God we trust. That's really what. So that prayer and fasting is an acknowledgement of our trust in God over us individually and as well as a nation. And there have been calls for prayer and fasting in times of crisis. And, frankly, I can't think of a better time to have a call for prayer and fasting than right now, because of where our governance seems to be so divided. I mean, a nation divided against itself.
I mean, imagine if you had election day, for example, as a day of prayer and fasting, that you would call on God for guidance, or when you're making a move, you're changing jobs. You think about it. So there are many reasons in our lives when we have major events where we need to be more spiritually thinking.
We kind of codified it in the church around certain times.
Right.
Lent is the big one.
Right.
And in Islam, Ramadan. And that's a fasting. That's
all day.
That's prayer and fasting as well. So within the religious context, it's still recognized as a powerful tool in communicating with God and kind of centering ourselves on what's and hearing from God. Not so much, talking to him as waiting for him to
Well,
speak
be still
to
and
us.
know that I am God.
Yeah.
I mean,
it's kind of like tuning in the radio, where you're slightly off and it's static and you're tuning in so you can hear better.
More focused.
Yeah, exactly. So, in this case, I'm sure there are plenty of people in Kansas that are praying and fasting right now. It's just that these are the guys that, the mockeries, it's that make the news. It's not the other one.
Because that is the news. It's always, but it seems to be picking up on. Well, look at these folks. They're making a mockery of this, but there's no balance. But yet, if we look at the broad spectrum of the population, the news media should be saying people are trying to do this.
Yeah.
This is what makes the news. The people that are doing the
mocking.
pizza.
Yes.
Yeah, well, but I'm sure you could include in your prayer and fasting, if you're in Kansas right now listening to this broadcast, that you would pray and fast for those people that are mocking prayer and fasting.
Yes, true. But I think what we see, though, and this is that rise of people who just think Christian ideals are just stupid. They're just out of touch with the reality. Right. They're out of touch with time. They're of a time gone by, and we don't need them anymore.
Yeah,
we don't need these values.
Yeah, I know. Well, the internet, this is a social media phenomenon. It's not like they're going to go to one pizza party. This is all over Wichita,
right.
So it's sort of a it's
statewide, all over Kansas.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
But but it goes back, I think, to this understanding of a worldview. We often talk about that a worldview that we have a sovereign. We do have a sovereign who's in charge, and that we ought to be calling on him and seeking guidance and listening. Prayer and fasting is also about listening, not just to your stomach growling, but to what God is helping you to clarify.
Yeah. We're constantly warned in Scripture, aren't we, about this thing of leaning on your own understanding.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, yes, absolutely.
And because, our feelings are so volatile that we have to have a truth to be able to base our lives upon, the rock of
Reverend
truth.
Robert Cornegy, Dr. Bob Wilson, and I'm Ben Bald. Thank you for joining us here on Faith Matters on the Talk Station.
Thank you for joining us for Faith Matters. Email your comments, questions, and suggestions to faithmatters@thetalkstation.com.
Give me faith, trust what you say, that you're good and your love is great. I'm broken inside, I give you my life. Give me faith.
Faith Matters is a production of the Talk Station.